Hello, my fabulous social media friends. I'm Robert, the director of DABS, Domestic Abuse Business Support Limited, home of the Bridging the Gap project on YouTube and SoundCloud. Today, I'm joined by the amazing Sally-Anne Burris, an experienced business coach with a history of working in non-profit organisation management. Sally is skilled in coaching, team building and journalism and is currently the director of Restorative Change based in Wales. Now, we've known each other for some months now, and I can tell you that Sal is one of the most inspirational people that I've ever had the pleasure to meet. Welcome, Sal.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure. It's my real pleasure.
Because I know you're incredibly busy, but for those out there that don't know you, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and Restorative Change?
Okay, so I've run services for about 20 years, different kinds of services. But Restorative Change is a whole family domestic abuse service. It was something that was created about 5 years ago. It was done from a group of experienced businesses who had identified that individual working just wasn't the way to go, that you needed to have a whole family approach. The intervention's therapeutic. It's based on 30, 40, 50 years of tried and tested theory bases. We turned it into a licensed product because we're not precious over it. Yep. The idea was that this project would be able to be delivered by any services providing they were trained and they were supported by us because it's a therapeutic intervention. So it's one part of what I do, but it's not the only part of what I do. Because of the work with Restorative Change, I started to realise there was massive issues around supporting men. And from the research I'd done with Restorative Change in getting that out there and raising awareness, I ended up doing 4 years of research based on men's experiences of domestic abuse and the services they could or could not have.
Yeah.
And that work took me internationally. So I looked at Canada, America, New Zealand, Australia, some of the European countries. My search was about looking for best practice. So from that, I ended up writing a campaign. It's a request to ask that the governance acts of law strategies include men. Because currently, because the biases are with women and very supportive to women, as they should be, there are huge gaps in funding and how services are designed and how they're pushed out into the communities, purely because the acts of law and the governance, the strategies, don't allow men in there. So now the campaign is there, ready and about to be launched. So that's me.
Well, that's fantastic, and obviously I'm going to fully support that, because that's what Bridging the Gap is kind of all about, in a way, changing the language that we use to discuss domestic abuse, to enable all victims, regardless of their gender, to be able to feel supported and come forward and get the help that they really need. Do you find there's a lot of resistance to that, though, when you talk to people about helping men?
There's this big perceived thing that, you know, the feminist issues, and people are going to stand up and say, my gosh, Sally, what are you doing? And, you know, but in actual fact, I've been actively writing this campaign, preparing for it to be launched for 18 months. Yeah. And there's only one person that's ever approached me in a negative context, one woman. When I talk to people and tell and share the statistics, I share, you know, what those statistics look in real life. So if you're talking about a man who needs services, and if I lay down the effects of a woman and what she would receive if she discloses, and then I lay down the journey of a man side by side, and I tell this to whoever the audience might be, yeah. At the end of that conversation, every single time I have been told, Sally, don't stop. So I think the resistance is probably in the extreme element of our culture, where this battle of the sexes, for want of a better word, is very much alive. But you know, Robert, one thing that I have come to realise is that truth can't be challenged. You can't challenge truth. You can't. Okay, and those who do and attempt to, they always end up with mud on their face. You know, and I think when you present statistics and evidence, and people like you are showing that in real life terms, it's hard to argue against it. You know, it's hard for somebody to stand up and say, that's not true. You know, that's just not happening.
Only yesterday, actually, I came across an article that showed a very long list of evidence going back many, many years. Really in-depth studies. Over 400,000 people were involved in those studies. And the conclusion was that women can be as violent and perpetrate domestic abuse as often as men. And we know that men are 3 times less likely to come forward and report their abuse than women are. But why do you think it is that all of these studies that have been done over the years, so many of them showing that they seem to be forgotten about? They just seem to be shelved, sidelined.
I think there's not one issue that's in play. There's not one reason why that happens. I think there's an age-old thing that's been going on for thousands of years that is commonly known as the battle of the sexes. That plays out in lots of ways. It plays out with comradeship between family members. It plays out in sport, or you go to the pub, or you go somewhere on the evening, and there's this banter that goes on. But I think, unfortunately, that is also present in services, and there's this competition between men and women to succeed, and unfortunately that's one of the elements to it. I mean, you mentioned the ONS. The ONS is part of what we've been looking at. There's 13 areas the campaign will address, and the ONS and statistical gathering is one of those areas. There is too many grey areas to allow those statistics to be duplicated. For example, if a woman presents to the police, she is a police statistics. She will then invariably be handed over to a third sector agency like Women's Aid and possibly victim support, and then she's going into MAPA and MARIC. Now, we know that when a man presents, those services are not available for him. The pathway is not as smooth, so a man invariably will be one statistic. Now, those statistics are duplicated. Now, this is a major issue. A major issue. Yeah. And you've got other things. You've got trends. It's sexy to be a feminist climbing the ladder, and everybody wants to support what the trend is. Everybody wants to be active in what is the community needs right now. And unfortunately, the mechanisms that feed into what the community needs right now are not accurate. Yeah. And until that changes, you're never going to get that accuracy. I mean, one of the things we know with the ONS, their cut-off figures stop at 59 years old. Yeah. That's not appropriate, because one of the things we know, if you worked, with the Elder Commissioner for Wales particularly, which I've had contacts with, if you look at the work that they're currently doing, what they are saying is, as soon as somebody gets into 60, 65, they know the statistical evidence shows that men then become the higher victim. They know that. But the ONS cuts off at 59. So it doesn't capture those statistics. And I emailed them back and spoke to the manager and said to them, I am writing a campaign, and you need to be aware that you're one of the things that I will be asking to change around supporting men and having equality.
How do you think we can encourage those men that aren't reporting, to come forward and report those incidents?
For men, unfortunately, one of the barriers, and this is a narrative, and this is why you and I like each other and work so well together. The barrier is a narrative so in services, what the narrative currently is, but of course we can't really do anything for men because they never tell us. So it's enabling services to say, we can't do anything for you because you're not coming forward. But the other side of that is, for a man to come forward while experiencing domestic abuse is extremely painful. Because of men and how they communicate and who they are and what they need, you have to enable a pathway for them to be able to disclose. Yeah. So it's this chicken and egg, what comes first? The only thing that I would say is that until there's an appropriate method of men to be able to disclose on the time, at the time, then it's going to be really hard for them, On the campaign website, we are hoping to set up a communication portal, because there's got to be something that gathers that statistics in a way that's safe for men, in a way that allows them to feel comfortable in doing that, but also allows us to gather that statistic. Now, I know Mankind is doing some amazing work.
Absolutely.
Amazing work. But because of the funding, they're limited. It's hard for them, It's hard for anybody trying to do these kinds of things. And so I'd like to assist them. I want to assist them in some way. And if I can do that and give these statistics to somebody, then we will. But men need the support to be able to say, okay, there are different levels to what you can do. That might just be about you saying, excuse me, I'm experiencing this, because at least that gives organisations like you or Mankind those numbers that says, this is how many people have disclosed to us, you know, because it's those numbers that will shift. That's what will shift it. That's the only thing that will do it. The campaign is just designed to request to government, UK and all of the UN governments, which is 195 that are associated, to please look at their acts of law and governance and change the way that they write those to include men or no genders. Like you, one of the reasons you and I are connected is because we both believe in equality, true equality, that nobody on this planet should experience harm. Nobody should. And we should all have a step-in pathway out of that, you know?
I think it's important, something you raised with me a couple of days ago, is that it's not just about recognising and supporting victims, but also the perpetrators. It's important that we recognise there are perpetrators on both sides of the fence, and that those perpetrators get some kind of support and help so that we break that cycle. Would you agree with that?
We've got massive amounts of research in the UK, New Zealand, Australia, America. There's massive amounts of research, long-standing, long-term research that is saying we need to think about the perpetrators. So while we're saying women don't commit acts of violence, while we're discounting that and saying it's minuscule, this is not true. And we are disabling women. I've had women begging me for help, and literally begging me, saying to me, Sally, I've been to my GP, I've looked for anger management courses, I've gone to charities and asked for help, and there is nothing to help me. And when you sit back in the chair and you think, wow, what's that about? You know, so while we're discounting this and saying men aren't abused, we're also saying women don't abuse men, and therefore there's no needs there. There's no evidence of needs there. You know, it's very bizarre. And also male perpetrators. There's lots of work going on in Wales now, but all of the funding, everything is driven towards men being the perpetrators, nothing for women.
What was the driving force behind getting you into the field of domestic abuse in the first place?
I've delivered services for 21, since I was 21. But for the last 20 years, I've been managing services and delivering them. And throughout those 20 years, I've had numerous occasions where I had men, I could see there was something not right, you know, and we've asked questions, and men are not very open, and I understand why. I understand this is who men are. It's not easy for them. As the years dripped by, I realised that something's wrong. What's wrong here? I don't understand, because I bought into this narrative. Right? I bought into everything I was seeing in acts of law, every strategic planning meeting I went into, every critical friend group that I was part of, everything I ever done, I bought into this narrative. That narrative is very wrong. It's a pack mentality, you know. You get into the environment, you look at what's on the agenda, you go with the agenda. You're not asking questions outside of what you're being told every day. And I started having lots and lots of conversations, and it blew my mind. It absolutely blew my mind. And then I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop, Robert. It's almost like there's this smoke screen, and you're seeing the smoke screen because that's the narrative, that's the news, that's the narrative, that's everything everybody's saying, that's the perception. But then when you pull that backwards and you look at the evidence and you look at statistics and you look at how men are functioning, how women are functioning, and you think, ooh, what's that about? So I looked at New Zealand first and Australia, because I worked with a particular group in Australia when we were putting the whole family service together. So we knew there was lots of other stuff going on in New Zealand and Australia. So I looked at there. Then I went to America, but even though Australia is working on this and is far ahead of the game, or was at the time, there still were no services. There was still no equality in acts of law or government strategies, planning, funding. There was still none of that there. So then I looked at America. I thought we had got it wrong. I thought the UK had got it wrong. I thought we'd messed up. So I looked at all these countries, and no matter where I went, it was the same. And then from there, then I started looking at these simpler things like third sector adverts on the TV, WaterAid, okay? There's an advert by a third sector agency that says about women and girls collecting water, and that's bad to their health, and raising funds and things like that. So I looked at the statistics behind that. And what you're seeing on the screen is not the statistics. What you're seeing is an agency who's looking for money, who's jumped on this narrative about it's all about the women, and they are selling it through that way. I've done it, this education thing about young girls in Africa, you know, can't have education because of the menstrual cycle. There are 9 million, approximately 9 million adolescents in sub-Saharan Africa not receiving education. It's almost 4.5 million boys, 4.5 million girls. This is the criminality behind it. So we jump on the narrative, right? We jump on the narrative. All these agencies, they need the money to deliver the services. I am not saying that those services are not needed, but what I'm saying is they are contributing to the smokescreen. You understand?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
they're jumping on that narrative, they're pushing that narrative forward, and then instead of being who they are, which is they want to do these things right, they are becoming part of that negative narrative that is not showing the real truth. Yeah. And that's what's happening. And that's why, instead of being a UK campaign, this has become a UN campaign. You know, it's got to go to the whole UN.
So we know that 75% of domestic abuse victims continue to be abused at work via phone calls, emails, stalking, etc. Yet a very small percentage of businesses actually do have a domestic abuse policy in place. Do you think this is an essential thing for businesses as we spend so much time at work?
It is. But unless a business sets that pathway in place, the man is not going to find it easy to actually come in and say, actually, I need to talk to you about this. I know that you've got, you know, a safeguarding policy, and I just need to inform you, and I just need to know how can I do my job where I don't affect my work. Yeah. You know, what do you need from me? Because I need to tell you this, and can you just tell me how I can work effectively and not let this get in the way? Because I'm feeling like I need to protect everybody. Yeah. And the only option I've got at the moment is to stay away from everybody, you know, because that is the truth of this. That is the honesty of it. When a man is experiencing domestic abuse, he's trying to hold that ball in his hand because that's what he's designed to do. You know, that's what our culture designs him to do. That's what, you know, part of his physiology is to do. So he's holding this ball, and that affects his workplace, where in actual fact, all it would take is the policy to be in place, somebody who is comfortable to have that conversation and know how to phrase that conversation, which is very easy, somebody who can record that appropriately for him, because if all they need to do is to set a safe environment where he can say, actually, this is what's happening today, because the company responding appropriately to somebody who's harassing the workplace is often something that will stop it happening immediately.
It's great to hear that that's something you think is an important part of the whole picture, really.
It's one of the reasons why I've connected to you, because I know that you have this real balance, you know, around the gender issue, which I find amazing, to be honest with you. But because of this balance, I know that you will approach these companies in the way that you do generally. And for me, for the campaign's purposes, businesses sometimes need to take control where they're not pushed to do this, where, I mean, HR does push them, you know, they are regulated in their safeguarding to do these things, but there's a gap in understanding about how they can do these things, and that's where you've come in, isn't it? Obviously, these are the services you're doing, you're telling them the best way to do that, which is great. Yeah, but for the campaign's purposes, organisations have a humanistic approach to how they support people, and all they need to do is to add this one thing into it, and understand how to do that, because it's not rocket science. Men are not aliens. They've got hearts and feelings, and you know, and they want to be effective. You know, all employers have to do is to enable them to do that, and they will do the rest. You know, that's all they need to do.
I think the campaign that you're looking to do, obviously, we touched on it briefly here, but I know a lot more about it from our many conversations. I'm very excited about it, and I can't wait for it to be launched. just to see how this is going to pan out. I'm sure with your drive and determination, it's going to be a huge success. But to finish off, Sal, can I just ask you, to those watching this on YouTube or listening on SoundCloud, to somebody, man or woman, that's going through domestic abuse currently, what piece of advice would you leave them with?
Okay. So for the men who are experiencing domestic abuse right now, I know that you may feel locked in a world that you feel you have to manage, but there are people out there who want to listen. But unfortunately, that's down to you opening that conversation. And no matter how much you avoid it, you cannot avoid it. You have to have that conversation with somebody, okay? Doesn't matter who it is, man, woman, colleague, it doesn't matter who it is. You have to have that conversation, because once you have the first conversation, it will feel easier to have the second one. For women who may feel like this battle of the sexes has got to continue, it does not have to continue. Women are by their very nature empathic, sympathetic, nurturing human beings.
Absolutely.
And no matter what you think, you cannot ask for equality and choice, and you cannot ask for respect unless you're willing to give it.
Very well said, Sal. That's a fantastic message to end on. Thank you so much for joining me today and for all of the amazing work that you're doing to help sufferers and survivors of domestic abuse. Please stay safe in these difficult times, and I hope that you'll join me again soon to let us all know how your global campaign Split the Difference is working out. If you want to know more about Sal's work with Restorative Change or her global Split the Difference campaign, I'll add links below. Equally, please see the links below for our work here at DABS and our own global campaign, the Bridging the Gap Project. Sal, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Take care.
And you, thank you.